The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training ground as Captain Sarah Martinez adjusted her combat boots and checked her watch. Today was different from all the other days at Fort Henderson. Today, she would be demonstrating hand-to-hand combat techniques to nearly 500 soldiers from 3 different battalions. The excitement buzzed through her veins like electricity. Sarah had been in the military for 8 years. She started as a young recruit who barely knew how to throw a proper punch. But something inside her burned with determination. She spent countless hours in the gym, learning martial arts, studying combat techniques, and pushing her body beyond its limits. Now, at 28, she was one of the most respected combat instructors in the entire base. The soldiers were already gathering on the training field. Some sat on wooden bleachers that creaked under their weight. Others stood in groups, talking quietly among themselves. Sarah could see the mix of curiosity and skepticism in their faces. Many of these men had never seen a woman demonstrate combat techniques before. Some seemed interested and respectful. Others looked doubtful, whispering to their friends and shaking their heads. Colonel Peterson walked up to Sarah with a clipboard in his hand. He was a tall man with gray hair and serious eyes. "Captain Martinez, are you ready for this demonstration?" he asked, his voice carrying the authority of 30 years in the military. Sarah nodded confidently. "Yes, sir. I've prepared several techniques that will be useful for close-quarters combat situations. The soldiers will learn how to defend themselves when weapons aren't available." "Good," the colonel said. "Remember, we have visitors from other bases here today. This demonstration represents not just you, but our entire training program." As the colonel walked away, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. She knew that some people still questioned whether women belonged in combat roles. This demonstration was her chance to prove that skill and training mattered more than size or gender. Sergeant Mike Thompson was setting up the demonstration area. He placed thick mats on the ground and arranged the equipment Sarah would need. Mike had been working with Sarah for 2 years, and he respected her abilities completely. "Everything's ready, Captain," he called out. "The microphone is working, and we have the first aid kit nearby, just in case." Sarah smiled at Mike's thoroughness. Safety was always important during combat demonstrations. Even though she was highly trained, accidents could happen when demonstrating dangerous techniques. Among the gathered soldiers, Private Jake Wilson sat in the 3rd row of bleachers. Jake was 22 years old, built like a football player, with broad shoulders and thick arms. He had joined the military 6 months ago, thinking his size and strength would make him a natural fighter. But his attitude toward women in the military was old-fashioned and disrespectful. "I can't believe they're making us watch this," Jake whispered to his friend, Private Rodriguez, who sat beside him. "What's a woman going to teach us about fighting? I could probably bench press her." Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably. He didn't agree with Jake's attitude. But Jake was loud and intimidating. So Rodriguez usually kept his opinions to himself. "Maybe we should just watch and see what happens," Rodriguez suggested quietly. "This is a waste of time," Jake continued, his voice getting louder. "Real combat isn't about fancy techniques. It's about being strong and tough. That woman has no business trying to teach soldiers how to fight." Several soldiers near Jake turned to look at him. Some nodded in agreement, but others frowned at his disrespectful tone. The military was changing, and many soldiers understood that everyone deserved respect, regardless of gender. Lieutenant Amy Foster sat 2 rows behind Jake. She was one of only a few women in the audience, and she felt nervous about the demonstration. Amy admired Captain Martinez and hoped the demonstration would go well. She knew that women in the military faced extra challenges, and Captain Martinez was representing all of them today. As more soldiers arrived, the crowd grew larger and more diverse. There were young recruits who looked nervous and excited. There were experienced sergeants who had seen many demonstrations before. There were officers taking notes and paying close attention to every detail. Captain Martinez began warming up, stretching her muscles and practicing some basic movements. She wore the standard military combat uniform, but her movements were fluid and precise, like a dancer or martial artist. Every gesture showed years of dedicated training. "Look at her showing off," Jake muttered, loud enough for people around him to hear. She thinks she's so special because she knows karate or whatever. This time, Staff Sergeant Williams, who sat directly behind Jake, leaned forward. Private Wilson, I suggest you keep your opinions to yourself and pay attention to the demonstration, he said firmly. Captain Martinez has more combat experience than you'll probably get in 5 years. Jake's face reddened with embarrassment and anger. He didn't like being corrected in front of other soldiers. His jaw clenched, and he decided he would find a way to prove his point during the demonstration. Meanwhile, Captain Martinez was reviewing her notes one last time. She had planned to demonstrate several defensive techniques, including how to escape from various grabs and holds. She would also show some basic offensive moves that soldiers could use if they were attacked without weapons. The techniques she planned to demonstrate came from different martial arts styles. Some were from jiu-jitsu, which focused on using an attacker's strength against them. Others came from kickboxing and military combatives training. Each technique had been tested in real situations and proven effective. Dr. Emily Chen, the base psychologist, sat in the front row with other officers. She was interested in the demonstration from a psychological perspective. She knew that confidence and mental preparation were just as important as physical techniques in combat situations. As the crowd settled down, Colonel Peterson walked to the center of the demonstration area. He held a microphone and waited for complete silence. The conversations gradually stopped, and 500 soldiers focused their attention on him. Soldiers, the colonel began, his voice carrying clearly across the field. Today's demonstration is an important part of your combat training. Captain Martinez will show you techniques that could save your life in dangerous situations. I expect everyone to pay attention and show proper respect. He paused and looked around the crowd. His eyes seemed to find every face, making sure everyone understood the importance of what they were about to see. These techniques are not theoretical, the colonel continued. They have been used successfully in real combat situations. Captain Martinez has served in 2 combat deployments and has extensive training in multiple martial arts disciplines. Her knowledge could benefit every one of you. Some soldiers nodded respectfully. Others, including Jake, maintained skeptical expressions. The tension in the air was obvious to anyone paying attention. Colonel Peterson handed the microphone to Captain Martinez and stepped back. She held it confidently and looked out at the sea of faces before her. "Good morning, soldiers," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I'm going to show you some techniques that might seem simple, but they require practice and proper execution to be effective. The most important thing to remember is that these techniques work because of leverage, timing, and technique, not because of size or strength." She paused to let that sink in. Several soldiers exchanged glances, and she could sense the doubt in some of their faces. "I need a volunteer for the first demonstration," Captain Martinez announced. "Who would like to help me show how to escape from a front grab?" Several hands went up immediately. Most of the volunteers were smaller soldiers who seemed eager to learn. Captain Martinez looked around the crowd, trying to choose someone who would make for a good demonstration. Jake Wilson's hand shot up aggressively. "I'll volunteer," he called out loudly, even though the captain hadn't called on him yet. "Let's see what you can do against someone with real strength." The crowd fell silent. Jake's challenging tone was obvious to everyone, and it made the atmosphere tense. Captain Martinez looked at him calmly. Considering her options, Staff Sergeant Williams grabbed Jake's shoulder and tried to pull him back down. "Sit down, Wilson," he hissed. "You're out of line." But Jake shook off the sergeant's hand and stood up. "No, I think this is exactly what we need," he said, his voice carrying across the field. "Let's see if these fancy techniques work against someone who's actually strong." Colonel Peterson frowned deeply. He was about to intervene when Captain Martinez spoke into the microphone. "That's fine," she said calmly. "Private Wilson, please come down here. But I want everyone to understand that this is a learning demonstration, not a competition. The goal is education, not proving who's stronger." Jake jumped down from the bleachers and walked toward the demonstration area with an arrogant swagger. He was clearly trying to intimidate Captain Martinez with his size and aggressive attitude. The crowd watched in uncomfortable silence as the situation became more tense. As Jake approached, Captain Martinez could see the disrespect and anger in his eyes. She had dealt with soldiers like this before, but never in front of such a large audience. She knew that how she handled this situation would affect not just her own reputation, but the respect that all women in the military received. "Before we begin," Captain Martinez said into the microphone, "I want to remind everyone that military training is about discipline, respect, and learning. We're all on the same team here." Jake stopped a few feet away from her and crossed his arms. "Sure, Captain," he said, emphasizing her rank sarcastically. "Let's see what you've got." The tension was so thick it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. 500 soldiers watched as these two very different people prepared to demonstrate techniques that could quickly become something much more serious. Captain Martinez handed the microphone back to Sergeant Thompson and began explaining the first technique to the crowd. But everyone could sense that this demonstration was about to become much more than a simple training exercise. The morning sun continued to climb higher, casting shorter shadows across the field. What had started as a routine training demonstration was about to become something that none of these soldiers would ever forget. Jake cracked his knuckles and rolled his shoulders, trying to look intimidating. He had no idea that Captain Martinez had been training for situations exactly like this for most of her adult life. He thought his size and strength would be enough to embarrass her in front of everyone, but Captain Martinez remained calm and focused. She had faced much more dangerous situations in real combat zones. One disrespectful soldier, no matter how big or aggressive, was not going to rattle her confidence or determination. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test everything Captain Martinez had learned about combat, leadership, and maintaining control in difficult situations. Captain Martinez positioned herself in the center of the demonstration mat, while Jake Wilson stood across from her, still trying to intimidate her with his aggressive posture. The 500 soldiers watching could feel the tension crackling through the air like electricity before a thunderstorm. "For this first technique," Captain Martinez announced clearly, "Private Wilson will grab my wrists from the front. This is a common attack that soldiers might face in close-quarters situations. I'll demonstrate how to break free using proper technique rather than strength." Jake stepped forward with obvious overconfidence. He was at least 6 inches taller than Captain Martinez and probably outweighed her by 70 pounds. In his mind, there was no way she could escape from his grip once he really held on to her. "Remember," Captain Martinez continued, addressing the crowd, "the key to these techniques is leverage and timing. Raw strength is much less important than understanding how the human body moves and where its weak points are." Jake grabbed her wrists firmly, squeezing harder than necessary for a demonstration. His grip was deliberately painful, designed to show the crowd that he was much stronger than her. Captain Martinez felt the excessive pressure but remained completely calm. "As you can see," she said, her voice steady despite the pain, "the attacker has a significant size and strength advantage. But watch what happens when I use proper technique." In one smooth motion, Captain Martinez rotated her wrists in a specific pattern, stepped slightly to the side, and suddenly, Jake's powerful grip meant nothing. She was free in less than 2 seconds, and Jake stumbled slightly, caught off guard by how easily she had escaped. The crowd murmured with surprise and interest. Even some of the skeptical soldiers had to admit that the technique was impressive. But Jake's face reddened with embarrassment and anger. He hadn't expected to be made to look foolish so quickly. "Let's try that again," Jake said aggressively, not waiting for Captain Martinez to set up the next demonstration. "I wasn't ready that time." Captain Martinez remained professional. "Of course. It's important to practice techniques multiple times to understand how they work." But she could see the anger building in Jake's eyes, and her combat instincts told her to be careful. This time Jake grabbed her wrists even harder, his fingers digging into her skin with unnecessary force. Several officers in the crowd frowned at his obvious aggression. But Captain Martinez handled the situation calmly. Again, she demonstrated the escape technique, breaking free effortlessly, despite Jake's increased grip strength. The crowd was beginning to understand that technique really could overcome raw power when applied correctly. Jake was furious now. He had expected to overpower her easily and prove his point about women not belonging in combat roles. Instead, he was being embarrassed in front of hundreds of his fellow soldiers. His pride and his prejudices were both under attack. "Okay, that's enough of that technique," Captain Martinez said, trying to move on to the next demonstration before Jake's anger escalated further. "Now I'll show you how to defend against a different type of attack." But Jake wasn't ready to move on. His face was flushed with anger and humiliation. "Hold on," he said loudly, stepping closer to her in a threatening manner. "I don't think you're taking this seriously enough. In real combat, an attacker isn't going to be gentle with you." The crowd sensed the shift in Jake's attitude. This was no longer a training demonstration. It was becoming a real confrontation. Colonel Peterson started moving closer to the demonstration area, ready to intervene if necessary. "Private Wilson," Captain Martinez said firmly, "this is a controlled training environment. We follow safety protocols to ensure no one gets hurt unnecessarily." "Safety protocols?" Jake laughed bitterly. "The enemy isn't going to follow safety protocols. If you're going to teach us about real combat, then let's make it real." Staff Sergeant Williams stood up from his seat, ready to order Jake to stand down. But Jake was beyond listening to reason now. His anger and embarrassment had taken control of his actions. "Let's see how you handle a real attack," Jake snarled, and suddenly grabbed Captain Martinez's uniform shirt with both hands, trying to push her backward with significant force. Captain Martinez reacted instantly. Years of training kicked in as she grabbed Jake's wrists, stepped back to absorb his momentum, and then used a hip throw technique to send him tumbling onto the mat. Jake hit the ground hard, but rolled and got back up quickly, his anger now completely out of control. The crowd was on their feet now, realizing they were witnessing a real fight rather than a demonstration. Some soldiers started moving closer, while officers began shouting orders for Jake to stand down. "That's enough," Colonel Peterson bellowed, striding toward the demonstration area. But Jake ignored him completely. Jake charged at Captain Martinez again, this time swinging a wild punch at her head. She ducked under his swing and delivered a precise elbow strike to his ribs, causing him to grunt with pain and stumble sideways. "Private Wilson, stand down immediately," Staff Sergeant Williams shouted, but Jake was beyond hearing orders now. His pride had been shattered, and his anger was driving him to escalate the situation further. Captain Martinez tried to de-escalate. "Private, this demonstration is over. Please return to your seat." But she kept her guard up, knowing that Jake's aggressive behavior hadn't run its course yet. Jake wiped blood from his mouth where he had bitten his tongue during her elbow strike. "You think you're so tough?" he spat. "Let's see how tough you are when someone fights back for real." What happened next shocked everyone watching. Jake took several steps back, then suddenly charged forward and launched a vicious kick aimed directly at Captain Martinez's midsection. It was a brutal attack intended to cause serious injury, delivered with all his strength and anger behind it. But Captain Martinez had been expecting something like this. Her combat experience had taught her to read the signs when someone was about to escalate to lethal violence. As Jake's kick came toward her, time seemed to slow down in her perception. She sidestepped the kick at the last possible moment, grabbed Jake's extended leg with both hands, and executed a technique she had learned during her advanced martial arts training. Using his own momentum against him, she twisted his leg in a precise manner while stepping back and applying downward pressure. The sound that followed was unlike anything most of the watching soldiers had ever heard. It was a sharp crack, like a thick branch breaking, followed immediately by Jake's agonized scream that echoed across the entire training field. Jake collapsed to the ground, clutching his leg and screaming in pain. His right leg was bent at an unnatural angle just below the knee, clearly broken. The bone had snapped cleanly when Captain Martinez applied the defensive technique against his attacking kick. The entire crowd of 500 soldiers fell completely silent, except for Jake's continued screaming. Many soldiers had seen injuries before, but witnessing someone's leg break so suddenly and dramatically in front of them was shocking. Captain Martinez immediately knelt beside Jake, her anger forgotten as her medical training took over. "Don't move," she told him firmly. "You have a serious fracture. Moving could make it worse." "Medic," Colonel Peterson shouted at the top of his lungs. "We need medical personnel here immediately." Within seconds, the base medics, who had been standing by for the demonstration, came running with their emergency equipment. Dr. Sarah Kim, the base physician, quickly assessed Jake's injury while her team prepared to stabilize his leg. "It's a clean fracture of the tibia," Dr. Kim announced professionally. "We need to immobilize this and get him to the hospital right away." As the medics worked to stabilize Jake's leg and prepare him for transport, Captain Martinez stood up and looked out at the crowd of soldiers. Their faces showed a mixture of shock, awe, and respect. They had just witnessed something extraordinary. Colonel Peterson approached Captain Martinez, his expression serious but not angry. "Captain, I need a full report on what happened here." "Yes, sir," Captain Martinez replied calmly. "Private Wilson became aggressive during the demonstration, ignored orders to stand down, and eventually attacked me with a kick that could have caused serious injury. I defended myself using a standard defensive technique that resulted in his leg breaking when he applied force against the hold." Several soldiers who had witnessed the entire event nodded in agreement. They had seen Jake escalate the situation repeatedly, ignore orders from superior officers, and finally launch a vicious attack that forced Captain Martinez to defend herself. Staff Sergeant Williams approached with a grim expression. "Sir, Private Wilson was completely out of line. He ignored direct orders, showed disrespect to a superior officer, and initiated what was clearly an assault." Captain Martinez defended herself appropriately. As Jake was loaded onto a stretcher and carried away to the ambulance, he was still conscious but in severe pain. The reality of what had happened was beginning to sink in through his anger. He had attacked a superior officer in front of hundreds of witnesses and suffered a serious injury as a result of his own aggressive actions. Captain Martinez picked up the microphone that had been dropped during the altercation. Her voice was steady as she addressed the crowd of soldiers who were still processing what they had witnessed. "What you just saw demonstrates several important lessons," she began. "First, discipline and respect are essential in military operations. When those break down, dangerous situations develop quickly." The soldiers listened intently. The dramatic events had captured their complete attention in a way that a normal demonstration never could have. "Second, you saw that proper technique and training can overcome size and aggression. Private Wilson is bigger and stronger than me, but technique and preparation made the difference when he chose to attack." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces before her. "Third, and most importantly, you saw that actions have consequences. Private Wilson chose to escalate this situation repeatedly, ignored orders from superior officers, and finally launched an attack that forced me to defend myself. His injury was the direct result of his own aggressive actions." The ambulance sirens could be heard in the distance as Jake was transported to the base hospital. Captain Martinez continued her impromptu lesson to the soldiers. "The technique I used to defend myself is designed to stop an attacker immediately while minimizing permanent damage. A kick like the one Private Wilson attempted could have broken ribs, damaged internal organs, or caused other serious injuries. The defensive technique I used stopped his attack instantly but will heal completely with proper medical treatment." Colonel Peterson nodded approvingly. Captain Martinez was handling a difficult situation with professionalism and turning it into a valuable learning experience for all the soldiers present. Dr. Emily Chen, the base psychologist, was taking notes on everything that had happened. This incident would become a case study in military psychology courses about aggression, respect, and the consequences of allowing personal prejudices to override military discipline. Lieutenant Amy Foster felt a mixture of admiration and concern. She was proud of how Captain Martinez had handled herself, but worried about the backlash that might come from some soldiers who still harbored negative attitudes toward women in combat roles. As Captain Martinez concluded her remarks to the crowd, she could see the range of reactions in the soldiers' faces. Some looked impressed and respectful. Others seemed thoughtful, processing what they had learned about technique overcoming strength. A few still looked skeptical, but even they had to admit that what they had witnessed was impressive. The demonstration that was supposed to teach basic self-defense techniques had become something much more significant. It had become a powerful lesson about respect, discipline, and the real-world applications of proper training and technique. The aftermath of the incident spread through Fort Henderson like wildfire. Within hours, Every soldier on the base had heard about what happened during Captain Martinez's demonstration. The story grew and changed with each telling, but the basic facts remained the same. Private Jake Wilson had attacked a superior officer and ended up with a broken leg as a result. Colonel Peterson spent the rest of that day conducting interviews and reviewing witness statements. The investigation was thorough and professional, with testimony from dozens of soldiers who had witnessed the entire event from different angles. Every account supported the same conclusion. Captain Martinez had acted in self-defense after Private Wilson escalated the situation beyond all reasonable limits. At the base hospital, Jake Wilson lay in a bed with his leg elevated and immobilized in a complex system of pins and screws. The orthopedic surgeon, Dr. James Crawford, had performed emergency surgery to repair the fractured tibia. The break was clean but severe, requiring metal hardware to ensure proper healing. "You're going to need several months of rehabilitation, Doctor," Crawford explained to Jake during his post-surgery consultation. "The fracture will heal completely, but you'll need physical therapy to regain full strength and mobility. This is going to be a long process." Jake stared at the ceiling, his mind racing with anger, embarrassment, and the dawning realization of how seriously he had damaged his military career. The pain medication made his thoughts fuzzy, but he couldn't escape the memory of how quickly everything had gone wrong. His parents arrived that evening, having driven 8 hours from their home in Ohio after receiving the call about their son's injury. His mother, Patricia Wilson, was a small woman with worried eyes who immediately began fussing over him. His father, Robert Wilson, was a retired factory worker who had always been proud of his son's military service. "What exactly happened, Jake?" Robert asked, settling into the uncomfortable hospital chair beside the bed. "The officer who called us didn't give many details." Jake's version of events was very different from what the witnesses had reported. According to Jake, Captain Martinez had deliberately embarrassed him during the demonstration, used excessive force, and then broke his leg when he was simply trying to defend himself. But Patricia Wilson had spent enough years dealing with her son's tendency to blame others for his problems. "Jake, tell us the truth. Were you disrespectful to this captain? Did you follow orders?" Jake's silence spoke louder than any words could have. His parents exchanged worried glances, understanding that their son had probably brought this situation on himself through his own poor choices. Meanwhile, Captain Martinez was completing her written report of the incident in Colonel Peterson's office. She wrote carefully and factually, documenting each escalation in Jake's behavior and explaining why she had felt it necessary to use defensive force. "Captain," Colonel Peterson said after reviewing her report, "you handled this situation exactly as you should have. Private Wilson created a dangerous situation through his own actions, and you defended yourself appropriately. However, I want you to know that there may be some political fallout from this incident." Captain Martinez nodded. She understood that some people would try to spin this story to support their existing prejudices about women in combat roles. They would ignore Jake's aggressive behavior and focus only on the fact that a female officer had seriously injured a male soldier. "Sir, I'm prepared to face whatever consequences come from defending myself," she said firmly. "I won't apologize for protecting myself from an assault, and I won't pretend that Private Wilson's behavior was acceptable." Colonel Peterson smiled slightly. "That's exactly what I hoped you would say. You have my full support, and I believe you'll have the support of every reasonable person who reviews this case." The next morning brought a flurry of activity. The base's legal department began their investigation, interviewing witnesses and reviewing video footage from security cameras that had captured parts of the incident. The evidence overwhelmingly supported Captain Martinez's account of what had happened. Staff Sergeant Williams submitted a detailed report about Jake's behavior leading up to the incident. He documented Jake's disrespectful comments, his refusal to follow orders, and his escalating aggression throughout the demonstration. "Private Wilson has shown a pattern of disrespectful behavior toward women in general, and female officers specifically," Williams wrote. "His actions during the demonstration were the culmination of an attitude problem that I had been documenting for several weeks." Private Rodriguez, Jake's former friend, also gave a statement to investigators. He was nervous about speaking against Jake, but his conscience wouldn't let him stay silent about what he had witnessed. Jake was saying disrespectful things about Captain Martinez before the demonstration even started, Rodriguez testified. He was angry that a woman was going to teach us combat techniques. When he volunteered, it wasn't to learn. It was to try to prove that she couldn't handle a real man. The investigation revealed that Jake had been making inappropriate comments about female soldiers for months. Several women came forward to report incidents where Jake had made sexist remarks or behaved in ways that made them uncomfortable. The broken leg was just the dramatic conclusion of a longer pattern of problematic behavior. Dr. Emily Chen, the base psychologist, was asked to provide a professional assessment of the incident. Her report focused on the psychological factors that had led to Jake's aggressive behavior. Private Wilson appears to have deeply ingrained attitudes about gender roles that are incompatible with modern military service, she wrote. His inability to accept instruction from a female officer, combined with his aggressive personality traits, created a dangerous situation that could have been much worse. 3 days after the incident, General Patricia Hayes arrived at Fort Henderson to review the case personally. As the first female general to oversee this military district, she understood the broader implications of what had happened. General Hayes interviewed Captain Martinez privately, asking detailed questions about her training, her experience, and her handling of the situation. "Captain, you've become a symbol whether you wanted to or not," the general explained. "How you handled this situation reflects on every woman serving in the military." "I understand that, ma'am," Captain Martinez replied. "But I also want people to understand that this wasn't about gender. This was about a soldier who refused to follow orders and then physically attacked a superior officer. Any properly trained soldier would have responded the same way I did." General Hayes nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the right perspective. We can't allow this incident to be portrayed as anything other than what it really was. A failure of discipline and respect that had serious consequences." The general also visited Jake in the hospital. Their conversation was brief and formal, but she made it clear that his behavior had been completely unacceptable and would have serious consequences for his military career. Lieutenant Amy Foster found herself in an unexpected position following the incident. As one of the few women who had witnessed everything, she was repeatedly asked for her perspective by fellow officers and soldiers. She had admired Captain Martinez before, but now she saw her as a role model for handling difficult situations with professionalism and strength. "What impressed me most wasn't the physical technique," Amy told her fellow officers. "It was how Captain Martinez stayed calm and professional, even when Private Wilson was being aggressive and disrespectful. She tried to de-escalate the situation multiple times before she was forced to defend herself." The story began attracting attention beyond Fort Henderson. Military news outlets picked up the story, and it became a topic of discussion in professional military forums and social media. Most of the coverage was supportive of Captain Martinez, but there were some voices that criticized her actions. A conservative military blogger wrote an article titled, "When Political Correctness Goes Too Far," arguing that Captain Martinez had used excessive force and that the incident proved women weren't suited for combat roles. But this perspective was quickly challenged by other military professionals who pointed out the facts of the case. Retired Colonel Susan Brooks, a military commentator with 30 years of experience, wrote a response article that gained widespread attention. "The question isn't whether Captain Martinez was right to defend herself. Of course she was. The question is, why Private Wilson felt entitled to attack a superior officer simply because she was a woman. This incident reveals more about outdated attitudes than it does about women's capabilities in combat." The formal military justice proceedings began 2 weeks after the incident. Jake Wilson faced multiple charges: assault on a superior officer, disobeying direct orders, conduct unbecoming a soldier, and creating a dangerous situation during a training exercise. His military-appointed lawyer tried to argue that Jake's actions were the result of poor training and unclear expectations, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. Dozens of witnesses testified that Jake had been the aggressor throughout the incident, and video evidence supported their testimony. Captain Martinez testified clearly and professionally about what had happened. She explained her attempts to de-escalate the situation and detailed exactly why she had felt it necessary to use defensive force. Private Wilson's kick was delivered with full force, and was aimed at my torso, she testified. If that kick had connected, it could have broken ribs, damaged internal organs, or caused other serious injuries. I had a split second to decide how to protect myself, and I used a standard defensive technique that I've been trained to use in exactly this type of situation. The military court proceedings were swift and decisive. Jake Wilson was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to 6 months in military prison, followed by a dishonorable discharge from the military. His dreams of a career in the armed forces were over. During his recovery, Jake had plenty of time to think about what had happened. The physical therapy was painful and slow, but the mental process of accepting responsibility for his actions was even more difficult. His family's disappointment was clear, and he gradually began to understand how his own prejudices and anger had destroyed his future. Dr. Chen worked with Jake during his recovery, helping him understand the psychological factors that had led to his aggressive behavior. Your beliefs about women and your inability to accept instruction from a female officer created a situation where conflict was almost inevitable, she explained during one of their sessions. Jake's recovery took 8 months. By the time he could walk normally again, he had been discharged from the military and had to figure out what to do with his life. The dishonorable discharge made it difficult to find employment, and he eventually had to move back in with his parents while he tried to rebuild his future. Captain Martinez, meanwhile, continued her career with distinction. The incident had made her somewhat famous within military circles, but she tried to focus on her work rather than the attention. She developed new training programs that emphasized both physical techniques and the importance of respect and discipline in military operations. 6 months after the incident, Captain Martinez received a promotion to major and was assigned to develop combat training programs for other military bases. Her experience and the lessons learned from the incident made her an ideal choice for this important role. The training demonstration that had gone so wrong became a case study in military academies across the country. It was used to teach cadets about the importance of discipline, respect, and proper behavior during training exercises. The incident also became part of sensitivity training programs designed to address gender issues in the military. Lieutenant Amy Foster was inspired by Captain Martinez's example and applied for advanced combat training herself. She wanted to develop the same kind of skills and confidence that had allowed Captain Martinez to handle such a difficult situation with professionalism. 1 year after the incident, Fort Henderson hosted another large training demonstration. This time, Major Martinez led a team of instructors who demonstrated combat techniques to nearly 800 soldiers from multiple bases. The demonstration went flawlessly, with all participants showing proper respect and following all safety protocols. During her introduction to that demonstration, Major Martinez made a brief reference to the previous year's incident. Military training requires discipline, respect, and a commitment to learning from every experience, both positive and negative. We're here to make each other better soldiers, not to prove individual superiority. The soldiers listened attentively, many of them already familiar with the story of what had happened the year before. They understood that they were witnessing history in the making, as the military continued to evolve and adapt to changing expectations about equality and respect. Private Rodriguez, who had witnessed the original incident, was now a sergeant and one of Major Martinez's assistant instructors. He had learned valuable lessons about standing up for what's right and not allowing disrespectful behavior to go unchallenged. As Major Martinez concluded that successful demonstration, she reflected on how much had changed in just 1 year. The incident that could have damaged her career had instead become a catalyst for positive change in military training and attitudes. The broken leg had healed, but the lessons learned from that dramatic day continued to influence military training and culture for years to come. It became a powerful reminder that actions have consequences, that respect is essential in military operations, and that proper training and technique can overcome size and aggression when applied correctly. The story of Captain Martinez and Private Wilson became legend within military circles, a cautionary tale about the importance of discipline, respect, and making good choices even in challenging situations.